hello everyone, and welcome to this episode number 19 of the Savage Balance podcast. And it is the second part of this two-parter about Trump, about Hitler, about language, about violence. It's about a lot of stuff. Sorry, I'm recording this after having done the mammoth session of recording, and I am still tired and hungry. Do check it out. I hope you will enjoy it. If you are interested in this podcast, or if you liked the first part and you want more, you can listen to the very first episode of this podcast, called Trump Formation. It's a kind of fiction piece about Trump and about a spiritual journey that he could have gone on in power. There's also a wonderful conversation with Clara Jordan, who is from Making Votes Matter. And we talk about proportional representation and a little bit about the US voting system, mainly focus on the UK stuff, but there's links in the show notes to that anyway about good articles to do with that. So check those out if you fancy it. Right now, though, let's not talk any longer because there's lots more talking coming. This is part 2 of a kind of Trump-Hitler language waffle. Enjoy it. Science of climate change and all other manner of things and difficult things like that. So there's the animal imagery, which is very powerful. Other imageries that go on is like kind of medical and hygiene language that is used. You know, Hitler would often say a plague of nations and disease and poison and parasites. It's things like this country is ill, this country is sick. One of the ones that is most eminent from what transpired to be his time in government and everything he did through World War II is phrases like foreign virus on the nation body. This idea that, you know, things were eating it like a poisonous abscess on the nation. I think it's very interesting, the sort of medical and hygiene thing, and I'd love to talk more about it. I struggled to find a lot of the information about it, but there is something very much visceral, isn't there, like physical in the body when biological terms are used. It creates a natural disdain and disgust, like we actually recoil from things. If somebody says, I've been violently sick or I've, had diarrhea, like these things, whenever I've said that to people when I couldn't come into work one day and say, I've got diarrhea, there's definitely a sense of like, I do not need to know anymore. Don't tell me anything else. Don't tell me about your diarrhea. Like these words are they conjure up a sickness, and I guess they have a kind of evolutionary root as well that the sort of bodily functions like that, are something to be a bit cautious of. Being violently sick probably does relate to some kind of fear, because why are they sick? Am I going to get sick? Is it through food that we've eaten or something we've shared? Things like that. In fact, there's a really good experiment which I've heard Darren Brown talking about, in which if you get different groups of people into a room to fill out a questionnaire about their political beliefs, and if you do it twice and the first time you take them in, the room is really dirty. The room is horrible. Like there's bins kicked over. There's loads of stains on the seats. There's horrible smells in the air. People are left to wait. People are rude to them. They just yell at them to do it. If you do that, then they will answer things in a more right-wing way. They'll answer things in a more conservative way. They'll answer things. The actual questionnaire will lean more towards the right. Whereas if it's a lovely clean room and the room smells of all delicious brownies and cookies and everyone's super nice and kind and you get given free things and it's like, oh, you don't have to wait, we're in for you right now. If you treat people differently like that, then people's answers tend to be more left-wing, more liberal. They tend to be more open to things. The same set of questions, the same things, that people's answers will be different depending on that. And what I find interesting about that, relating to the medical and hygiene link, is that this is like ideas of like a dirty room or a dirty smell. If they can make us more angry and volatile, then words like poison and parasite and ill and sick and abscess and foreign virus, they are going to provoke fear, and they are going to provoke like physical disgust, and the physical disgust held in the body becomes a kind of like pseudo sickness itself. And when you're feeling sick, you are more tetchy and more aggravated and more sort of disgusted in that way. And Trump does say words like sick. He's called people sick individuals. These people are sick in their head. They have those same links. To say somebody is sick is sort of just the word sick. Like it can conjure up ideas of, well, you guessed it, sick. And that's not nice to think about sick, is it? Another tool, obviously, of Hitler's was propaganda. And I guess people have a good idea of what propaganda is, but I'm interested reading that book that I said, How to Read Hitler, when he described traits of propaganda. A few of them that I found interesting is that you find the emotional areas of the masses and exploit these principles, which sounds a lot like, I guess, what I mentioned earlier, that if the sort of world is set up in this sense, if there is this sort of global wealth inequality and a lot of people are upset and unhappy and they're losing their jobs and their lives are becoming harder and unmanageable and they're becoming more isolated, then if you can connect to those emotional ideas, then you can exploit those principles, get an idea of going, oh, okay, people want their jobs back. Okay, people are unhappy. They're losing their livelihood. They're losing their wills. They're struggling to eat now. They're struggling to have to rely on food banks. They're having to rely on handouts from people. That's something we can use. We can exploit that for whatever our message is, for whatever we want to gain. Also, as well, discouraging scientific debate. As I mentioned earlier, Trump's government would do this sort of going around climate change and stuff. There's a lot of either denial or just sort of a rampant push towards just ignoring it, really, for, you know, building an economy, but building it. Everything he said about coal, there's a great example. Trump loves coal. Obviously, keeping it simple, a few direct points or slogans. I think it's in all of our heads, right? Make America great again. Make America great again. So easy, so simple to get your head around. It's non-specific, very simple, and it's open to interpretation. It can mean whatever you want. If your life has become more difficult for all of those reasons I said over the last 20 years, then Make America Great Again. You can picture yourself 20 years ago when actually the job was flowing easier and the workload was nicer and your family was nicer in a sense as well, because they weren't sharing the same. They were sharing the same good quality as you, and you had enough money for food and you could afford housing and there was, you know, a good social network around you. It can mean that. It could mean whatever you want, really. Make America great again. So, yeah, keeping it simple and a few direct points and slogans and remind people. And interestingly, there's a quote from Hitler in that about propaganda, which he said about the receptibility of masses is limited, their intelligence is small, but their power to forget is enormous. Relying on people's power to forget is quite a powerful sentiment in itself, isn't it? The idea of saying that people will forget, really, what you say and what you do. So in fact, I said it's a quote from Hitler. I'm not sure if it's a quote from Hitler, actually. It was a bloody good quote, though. I really like that quote anyway, but yeah. So those were just a few things I read about propaganda that I found interesting. The last one I want to get to before I round this up is military-style language and sort of military metaphor. Not simply sort of symptomatic of the times, but programmatic of the times. Words like destroy and destruction, extermination, eradication, elimination, annihilation, merciless, pitiless, brutal. These were words that Hitler used quite a lot, you know, really tough, really extreme, really macho in that kind of masculine, sort of the dangerous masculine aspect. And it's, yeah, you can see it there. It's all there. The cultural impact of World War I fostered the militarization of certain forms of political rhetoric after 1918, and you can see it there. Because, of course, again, as I mentioned earlier, Hitler didn't exist in a vacuum either. it's without knowing, it could easily seem like he was a little blip or a horrible little radar, or like maybe other people voted them in when it's something cultural. But actually, far right sentiments were high and over the 20s and 30s. I remember Stephen Fry once saying, I think in the 20s, that there were like 14 different publications of far right presses in Vienna alone, and a place where Hitler spent a lot of time. So, these he may have been on the fringes of these ideas, but these were sort of gaining more and more traction, and they were quite popular in that time. And so to incorporate this military-style language as well, I find really interesting. And there's this sense of a politician whose vision is one of extreme violence. That's what you picture with Hitler as well, isn't it? You get a sense of that with Trump too, actually, his posture and his eye contact, this grimace, and there's just kind of anger exuding from him, isn't there, of who he is. I guess this is... something we can point back to the very speech that we started with at the beginning. The use of the word fight is a lot, that the crowd were chanting, fight for Trump, fight for Trump. And he's himself saying, you have to get your people to fight, It's, it's amazing, really. That's kind of got that kind of aggressive, almost military aspect and angle to it too. But, that sort of idea was very central to Nazism as well. And also the idea of the interest of the nation being at stake, then the needs of the individual are subordinate to the greater needs of the community. Basically, you're not an individual in times of strain. You're one of the nation, so you need to do your job for the nation. And if you're only hearing militarized language a lot of the time, then you know your place. And I think maybe there's a similar sense in which Trump would do that too, sort of aggravating people with the use of language and making them well angry and well frustrated. So why does this matter, though? I think is a question that is fairly reasonable to think of. Why does this matter right now? Trump's not in power anymore. Now got Biden. I don't think he uses that same kind of rhetoric. And also, aren't these just words that you're talking about? You're talking about a lot of these things, but aren't these just words that somebody says? Well, first of all, I think Trump's words provide people with a validation to fulfill a kind of anger that might already be present in their life. It helps give permission to that sort of action. And secondly, I can't remember the question that I said. I can't remember what it was that I proposed. And you can't rewind it, can you? You can't go back. But I had an answer for it. Genuinely, it was going to be great. It's going to be a really good quality answer. I think it was because you said earlier, Ben, didn't you, that Trump's not in power anymore? So why does it matter? Well, I'll have you know that all the other stuff I said about the fact that Trump was sort of picking up on the zeitgeist of the time. He's not really he's a kind of a figurehead of it, and I think he'll be remembered in history as being one of the highlights, what I mean, of it. But he's not really sort of he might be one of the kind of memorable moments of it, but this is a feeling that exists, I think, not just in America, but across much of the Western world and potentially even globally, with the rise in inequality, with the fears of climate change coming up. There's a lot of unrest in the world. And, social media has its part to play, the way that we now communicate with people, how we treat people, ideas even around things like cancel culture and the way that we engage in debate now. There's a lot of sort of violent language that is used. So I think even beyond these things, I think it's very important and very clear to remember that this was the President of the United States who was saying these things and sort of legitimizing these things in a way. And if you need further proof of why his words matter, then there's plenty of examples of people who acted as sort of in conjunction with what Trump was saying in 2018. The thing I said a Trump super fan, but I imagine a big supporter of Donald Trump, mailed 16 pipe bombs to people and specific sort of media organizations that Trump had criticized and said, as he said earlier in his speech, that the free press is the enemy of the people. What do you do with an enemy? For a lot of people, you attack your enemy. You keep your enemy at bay. You want to defeat your enemy. In fact, there was a point in which Trump was then asked about it, and he kind of distanced himself from it and said, that's not anything to do with me. Basically absolved himself of responsibility. But that's just one example as well. And there's an interesting report that said that when taking into account violent acts, threats, and alleged assaults, Trump's name appeared in more than 50 cases, I think potentially over the first year of his presidency. In fact, I can't remember. I can't remember. I don't want to say that if it's not true. I can't remember if that's true or not. But Trump's name appeared in over 50 cases. 14 people were charged with a plot to kidnap a group of people from the Capitol building. This was maybe a year or two before the Capitol, the insurgency and the sort of storming of the Capitol building. 14 people were charged and arrested with a plot to kidnap those people, including one of Michigan's governors. Again, somebody that Trump had attacked previously in the past. And there's loads of examples like this, but one of the most interesting ones that I found, one of the most fascinating ones, was something I actually heard Blind Boy talking about, which is if you don't know about America in the 80s, basically, there was a big push for crime, especially in New York, because crime was being overrun by sort of mob families of gangsters, criminal family organizations that were at war with each other, and the police didn't know what to do with it. And it was a horrific time for them. Anyway, in 2019, I believe it was, Francesco Calli, the head of the infamous Gambino crime family, was shot dead, was murdered. And it sparked a lot of fear within the police. They didn't know what to do. They thought something was going to reappear, as in the 80s, another sort of mafia war was about to spread out across New York. And they eventually found out who did it, and they tracked them down. And then they found out that they had no connections to any mob or any mafia at all. And this really puzzled and confused them. And yet, when you see this person appearing in court, on his hand, there's writing on his hand, and you can see a big Q in the middle of his hand, and you also see the MAGA, Make America Great Again, was scribbled down the bottom. I've put a link to this, so you can click on it now for the article, and you can have a look at the images in the article as well, and plus the article was a really interesting read. But for people who don't know what that Q would mean, Q stands for QAnon, and QAnon is a far-right conspiracy theory in which it's based around this idea of Q, who is either an individual or potentially a group of individuals working within the system, working within government, who are very high up with a very high security level clearance, who is leaking information about the secret cabal of sort of satanic worshipping, cannibalist pedophiles who are running a global child sex trafficking ring, which is sort of like the deep state and the elites and government and Hollywood and the media. These are the sorts of people who are accused of, being the deep state, who are the satanic worshipping cannibalist pedophiles running global child sex trafficking rings, who are using the face creams made out of, severed foreskins of babies as a way of maintaining eternal youth, who also shape-shifting lizards from another dimension who can move within frequencies and disguise themselves as human beings. And they're plotting against Trump while he was in office. And many people believed that the reason why this is relevant is that many people believe that Donald Trump was Q, which is why it was vital for him to stay in power. It was really important, to have Trump's presence there, because Trump was the person who was leaking this information slowly over things like Reddit and Facebook and such. He was the person who was in that position leaking that information. And so if he was not in power anymore, it's not just like Trump versus Biden, Democrat versus Republican. It's sort of like, here's our savior, here's our hero in the story versus, the sort of the evil people, the Russian villain in a Bond film. And even, some of the villains in Bond films have a kind of lizardy look about them, or an extraterrestrial look with the person whose eyes bled, or, little scars down the face and stuff like that. Again, trying to remove their humanity. But you can understand why somebody might get so, passionate and like physically violent and murderous, really. That's what happened about that sort of thing. And this guy, his name was Anthony Comello, was his name, is his name, who murdered Francesco Calli, the head of the infamous Gambino crime family. But he believed that the Gambino crime family were a prominent member of the deep state, working with the elites, working with Hollywood, the media, the government. And I even saw a report, I'm not sure how true this is, and I'm not repeating this as facts just to say, but this is a demonstration of the type of figures that would demonstrate how mainstream QAnon's appeal has become. But I saw something that said up to 50% of Trump's supporters believe in QAnon. Again, I'm not saying that as verbatim fact, but I'm saying that it's a lot more mainstream. You may have aunties or uncles or relatives or old school friends who fully understand and believe in and are fully involved in the QAnon conspiracy theory. It's pretty popular on, Reddit and Facebook, and Alex Jones' InfoWars as well on there. It's all got that sort of link to it. But I think that's a very key example and a very easy to understand example as to why Trump's words matter and violent language matters, because it radicalizes people. It radicalizes people to perform these sorts of acts, which is why I think it's even more important now, more than ever, to really, try and defend ourselves from it. And I think it's sort of worth proofing ourselves for it, because we're all susceptible to it. As I mentioned earlier, we are all people. We're not separate at all. We're all different people. We're all different individuals. And this is a reflection of humanity. So we're susceptible to sort of animalistic imagery and military and medical language and propaganda. These are all things that us as human beings do experience. In fact, the amount of advertising that we're exposed to, and the sort of cultural and social ideas, and if you wanted to get into veganism ideas around, if you haven't heard the term carnism before, it was coined by Melanie Joy, who's said that eating meat was a kind of invisible belief system, because every action that we take is sort of supported by a belief system. And if not eating meat has a phrase for it, there is a name for not eating meat, because it is a belief system. Veganism is a kind of belief system. Then the act of eating meat is also equally a belief system as well, and she coined the term carnism for that. This is a kind of an example of an invisible thing that we are exposed to, which determines, a lot of how we, a lot of our choices and a lot of our thoughts and a lot of the kind of things we're exposed to. And I'm not necessarily 100% calling that propaganda, but I do think there are propaganda kind of elements to it. And I do think that there is propaganda elements to a lot of the things we're exposed to, like advertising, that a lot of, again, you're not being sold a bar of soap that will clean you. You're being sold the promise of the lifestyle of what that bar of soap would mean to you. You know, an expensive watch advert is not going, oh, you need something to tell the time, and this is really a nice version of that. It's saying if you own this type of watch, then you are this type of person. You are this type of successful person. You have this much wealth. It's a status symbol. And, you know, these are ideas that we definitely absorb and we just take in. And I think we all, not just susceptible to it, but we're all carrying versions of this in us. It goes into our blind spots. It goes into our psyche. And have you ever been in that position where you are sort of maybe in an argument and you are defending a position quite vehemently and you're quite passionate about it, and then halfway through you sort of think, I don't actually know why I'm getting so angry or irate about this. Like there's a moment where you get caught out in your head and you're like, do you think this stuff? I mean, I've thought, I've had conversations before. I think, oh, actually, I don't know enough, or oh, maybe I was really passionate about this, but maybe actually I've got it wrong. I think we're all open to that, and that's a good voice to listen to. I think because you're being open to new ideas and new ways of thinking, and and as I mentioned before, you know, Trump was not born in a vacuum. This is all part of our current social political climate. And, you know, he captured the zeitgeist. He found that way of, as mentioned earlier, with propaganda, he found a way to sort of find the emotional ideas of the masses and exploit those principles. He found a way in which that can work for him, and somebody else could do that as well. These things they're not going away. They're still here. I'm just going to have a little sip of water. Nice sip. Oh, lovely. Little, nice. Yeah, so I think this is why this matters, and this is why it was worth talking about sort of inciting violence and the language around violence and sort of propaganda, because we're all susceptible to it. So I think, what are the ways that we can move against it? Well, one of the ways we can move against it and sort of see it in ourselves is by understanding it more, taking the time to really understand how it works. I mean, there's a fantastic show from Darren Brown called The Push. I'm sure many people have seen it. It's available on Netflix. I've put a link to the trailer down below because I couldn't find it online, but I want to entice people in to go and see it. The idea or the premise of that show from Darren Brown is, can I encourage or entice somebody to basically commit murder? Can I make that happen through sort of social cues and such like this? And a lot of the driving force of that program is the idea of social compliance, that when we are in and around a group of people, we don't want to be the outlier. We don't want to be the person saying no. We don't want to be the person saying you shouldn't do that, you can't do that. That we want to fit in. We have a natural instinct to fit in and to not go against the grain. And that if you are cued in certain ways and it ramps up and it escalates, and the more you're exposed to these things and the more you're complicit in these things, then potentially it could cause you to do such a thing as these sorts of acts. And this, I mean, I won't go down this rabbit hole. This is one of the rabbit holes I wanted to go down, but this is one of the things that, you know, is very key with the Holocaust, and not just all of those, you know, poor, tragic lives that were lost unnecessarily and brutally and horrifically, but also the guards as well. The interesting aspect of the guards who did it, because again, these were human beings. These were just aspects of humanity that is potentially capable in all of us. And if you're exposed to these sorts of ideas, these sorts of rhetorics, these sorts of violent languages, the metaphors, you know, the military metaphors, the medical metaphors, the animalistic metaphors, then, over the course of decades, maybe it would lead to that sort of place where you can do those sorts of actions. In fact, a really interesting thing that my brother told me about is, I'm very sneakily pulling my notes up there. I don't think I rustled the microphone at all, did I? I think I got away with that fine. Yeah, in the Holocaust, there were people called capos, and these were actually Jewish people themselves, but these were Jewish people who got special privileges by basically becoming a guard and, proving themselves by doing a lot of the really horrible work that needed to be done to other Jewish people. And if you could separate yourself enough like that, you never got the status of guard, but you were a capo, which sort of gave you the sort of distancing, that gave you that sort of status within the camp, that you were sort of guard. And a lot of people reported that the capos were much worse in terms of their behaviors to the people in the concentration camps as opposed to the guards, which is interesting, but that's a whole different tangent. So social compliance, doing a lot of work to understand social compliance and being open to really hearing the message and not just taking the cues from the people around you. What is the message you've been told? And does this align with my values? Does this align with the type of person that I am and that I want to be? Don't just accept what people do. There's even a little experiment he does at the beginning to try and weed people out, in which people go into a room one by one, and are given a questionnaire to fill out, but the questionnaire is not important. They've got some actors there already, and every time a whistle's blown, they stand up from their seat, and every time it's blown again, they sit back down again. And you're watching the people who are going in, filling out this form, and they're standing there watching the people standing up and then sitting down to the whistles. And some of them do, and some of them don't. It amazes me, actually, that some of the people don't, because I think if I was in that room, I would absolutely, definitely be standing up and sitting down, which maybe is a sign that I'm very much susceptible to social compliance. I don't like doing anything too different from other people. I don't like being the outlier. And my assumption when I think of that is I would have assumed I missed something, or I didn't hear, or I wasn't concentrating, or I wasn't paying attention. And so I'd start standing up and sitting down, which is incredible, really, to think about it, to think and feel that in my body and know, yep, that's something I would definitely do in that situation. I'd probably even do it now, even having just talked about it, It's that powerful and that strong. It would be really hard to resist that urge to not do it, for fear of some kind of rebuttal, or fear of some kind of retribution back from that. So I think that's one way in which we can protect ourselves, listen to the language, listen to what's being said, and try to, prepare yourself and really take a moment and a second to listen to it and think about it and think, is this something I want? What's the words that's being used? Have I been radicalized? If you are listening to a lot of a certain person online, what is the language they're using? Are they using words like fight? Are they using words like aggression? Are they using, aggressive words? How do you feel after you've listened to them talking? What sort of impact has it had on you physically and emotionally? And I think there's a good place, to appreciate this and sort of understanding it and work with it, because some things are worth doing and going with the crowd with, if that's what it, like, I'm thinking about, say, Boris Johnson, for example. If he's done something wrong, done something bad, then yes, attack his policies, and yes, criticize his costly, failures and mistakes, but don't, go down the route of attacking like his weight or his hair or his accent or his class. Try to stay away from those kinds of rhetorics and those kind of angers and those kind of things. If someone is telling you sort of detailed reasoning as to why something they've done is bad, take the time to listen to it, take the time to hear it. But listen out for those triggers. If they start saying that fucking arsehole, or, if oh, their stupid hair, or the classicist, wank, or whatever the sort of thing people might say. In my head, they're a little bit of a trigger for a slightly potentially closed mind to what's actually happening, and a closed mind to and a kind of radicalization and a kind of anger that's present, when actually what you need to take as the information. You can go, I can put that aside, I can listen to and I can appreciate and accept and understand their anger, where they're coming from, but I don't need to take that on board. I just need to hear the information that's being given to me. Yeah, so don't just be skeptical of what you hear externally as well, but be skeptical of what you think, what your behaviors are that you do now, automatic ones. When you pick up a can of Coke, like, what is that? What am I doing there? When you start to feel angry because someone's talking about sweater vests, you're like, why am I angry about someone who's sweater vests? Taking the time to really understand and try to align your values and knowledge with your response in that way as well. I guess that plays into ideas of cognitive dissonance as well. And maybe I'll post a video about that in the show notes as well. But cognitive dissonance would be a really interesting thing to look about as well. So social compliance is a good one to look at, and social and cognitive dissonance, which is sort of the idea of holding two opposing views simultaneously. It's something I've talked about in the podcast before. If somebody is angry, the main example I have in my head is to do with animals. So if somebody's, watching Peppa Pig, but also eating some sausage or some ham, like that. If they're really enjoying Peppa Pig, but they're eating the sausage or the ham, there's a disconnect, there's a disjunct between the view of one pig in one way and the view of the pig in another way. That there's a cognitive dissonance going on to create and hold both of those ideas simultaneously. When maybe your values are eating pigs are okay, or maybe your values are, maybe your value is along the lines of pigs are commodities, or maybe your value is pigs are sentient creatures and I don't want to cause them any suffering. In either way, something will have to give there, something will work. There's two things working sort of in opposition with each other there. Anyway, I have fucking waffled on for so long that I think this is going to be a two-parter now. I'm sorry if it's just a complete mess. If I'm honest, and I want to try and be honest more, I struggled with putting this one together. I had an idea of what I wanted it to be, and I knew there was a deadline coming up to get it done by. And I just struggled, I just struggled to put it together in the way that I wanted to make it flow nicely. And then I was running more and more out of time, so it's like I'm just going to get on with it. But I hope that it's come out nice, and I hope that you've got something from it and that you've enjoyed it. I've enjoyed talking about it, and I've enjoyed researching a lot of these things, and it's quite late at night now as well, and I'm getting quite tired, and I'm getting hungry as well. Truth be told, nice and professional there, isn't it? I've said all this stuff, but now I'm getting a bit peckish. Anyway, tell your friends about it. Tell your friends about this. And in fact, you know what a professional podcasting person would do? And maybe I will do, if this is a two-parter. I'll mention this at the beginning. I'll do a little intro and I'll mention it at the beginning. So that's very clever of me, isn't it? Very clever indeed. The first episode that I did of this podcast was a little piece that I wrote called Trump Formation, about a sort of spirit, a potential. It's a piece of fiction, but as a spiritual journey that Trump could have gone on while he was in power, and potentially, the idea of that anyone can be saved. There is as a space, as a savior. There's space to be rescued. There's space to grow for anyone, no matter what your history is, whatever your past is. There's space to grow. So there's that anyway that exists. So that will be good to watch, to listen to. And there's also a piece I did where I did an interview with. I'm getting tired and hungry, so I'm forgetting their name. Kleiner. Oh God. With Kleiner, I'll go the David Edwards approach, where I just go, Kleiner. What's their surname, David? Yeah, I don't know. Oh, for fuck's sakes, David. they're from the group Make Votes Matter, and there was a really good, interesting conversation about our political voting system and what needs to change in proportional representation and stuff like that. So do check that out. Thanks for listening. Share this with your friends if you wouldn't mind. Have an Instagram, Savage Balance Podcast. There's a Twitter, SavBal Pod. There's a website that has not been touched in a very long time. There's a nice thick layer of dust that is appearing around it. There's also other stuff you can do, like, I'm trying to remember, I didn't make notes on this bit. You can also send me an email. That would be great. If you feel like I've just listened to an hour and a half of you talking about this and I don't feel any wiser, I don't feel any more informed, I feel like tired and I feel let down and now feel useless, I feel depressed, I feel anxious, I feel tight in my chest, I feel nauseous, I feel sort of violated in a way, I feel angry towards you and I need to let you know it, drop me an email. The email address is savbalpod@gmail.com. That is savbalpod@gmail.com. There's a link to it in the show notes if you want to click on that. Let your anger out, vent it away. Or if there's something else and you're like, I'd like to hear more about this or more about that, or more of this stuff is good or less of this stuff is brilliant, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. If you could write comments and if you could also write reviews and if you could subscribe as well, that would be great. That'd be wonderful. The music is by Danny Tonks and the artwork is by Dolly Gray. Beautiful, phenomenal, gorgeous artwork for sure. I don't even know how to split this up, but I have been talking for too long. It's supposed to be 45 minutes and it's now been an hour and 25 minutes. So there we go. I will be back next week with something, maybe not this, maybe something completely different. I want to mix it up. I don't want it to be this kind of format every episode, so it'd be nice to mix it up and spice things up a bit and maybe just do something fun and silly. I think fun and silly would be good. So who knows what will happen. Until then, please take good care of yourselves. Look after yourselves, look after other people, be kind to yourself, genuinely be kind to yourself. It's okay, it's going to be okay, we're all going to be okay. I hope that doesn't sound patronizing for anyone listening. I hope that there are support networks out there if anybody needs them, but kindness to yourself in this time. Take very good care of yourselves, and see you later.